The mother-in-law was driving the daughter-in-law out of the maternity hospital, but an unexpected guest left her speechless. The whole scene unfolded so quickly that no one present could fully grasp how a quiet morning turned into a whirlwind of accusations, fear, pride, and finally, shock. The young mother, pale and exhausted after giving birth, was barely standing on her feet when her husband's mother burst into the room as if she owned the place. Her voice echoed across the corridor, sharp enough to slice through the fragile calm that filled the maternity ward. She claimed the daughter-in-law had disgraced their family, that she wasn't worthy, that the child should be taken into a proper home. Nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to interfere. The daughter-in-law, trembling, clutched her newborn closer, trying not to cry. She had already been abandoned once, not by her husband, but by her own mother years earlier. That memory, the cold emptiness of being left behind, never left her. Now, standing in a place meant to symbolize new beginnings, she was once again forced into a corner. She whispered softly, "Not again, I won't let this happen again." But the mother-in-law refused to hear anything. With every word, she pushed harder, closer, trying to corner her emotionally until the girl would break. "You're rushing to the wrong station." The older woman snapped, meaning the girl was making all the wrong choices, walking into a life she didn't deserve. But the daughter-in-law didn't move. She stood her ground, exhausted but determined, refusing to let her child be taken away. Every instinct inside her shouted to protect her baby, no matter what storm she had to face. The mother-in-law kept pacing, hurling accusations, convinced that her authority would force the girl to submit as always. She didn't realize the strength a new mother can carry, a strength born the moment she first hears her baby cry. Just when the situation reached its breaking point, when the nurses were about to call security and the daughter-in-law felt she could collapse from the pressure, the door swung open again. This time, it wasn't another nurse or doctor, it was someone no one expected. Someone whose presence instantly changed everything. His voice was calm, but the moment he stepped in, the tension snapped like a thread pulled too tight. "That's enough," he said. The mother-in-law froze. She knew that voice. Her confidence dissolved as if someone had pulled the ground from beneath her feet. The unexpected guest walked straight to the daughter-in-law, not even glancing at the mother-in-law. He placed a gentle hand on the young woman's shoulder and then looked at the newborn with a warmth that brought tears to her eyes. The mother-in-law's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. For the first time that morning, she had no words. The guest turned to her, his calmness sharper than any shout. "You crossed a line," he said quietly, echoing the tone of someone who had just watched a boundary be shattered. The room grew still. Nurses relaxed. The daughter-in-law exhaled shakily, feeling a surge of safety she didn't expect. The mother-in-law, usually unstoppable, whispered nothing. She simply stared, stunned, knowing she had gone too far and that her power, for once, wasn't enough. In that moment, the daughter-in-law realized she wasn't abandoned. She wasn't alone. And she finally understood that sometimes, the people who stand by you in your darkest moment are the ones who reveal the truth about love, loyalty, and the courage to protect what matters most. The maternity ward was quiet, the soft hum of medical equipment blending with the distant chatter of nurses and the occasional cry of newborns. But that fragile calm was shattered in an instant when the mother-in-law stormed in, her face red with anger, her eyes blazing with authority. She didn't wait for explanations or pleasantries. Her voice cut through the room like a whip, demanding that her daughter-in-law leave immediately. The young mother, still weak and barely able to stand after giving birth, clutched her newborn tightly, her heart pounding. The air felt suffocating, thick with tension, as the older woman's words poured out, criticizing, accusing, and belittling. "You've made a mistake bringing this child into this world," she spat. "You're not ready, and you're not welcome here." The daughter-in-law's hands trembled, but she refused to let go of her baby. Memories of her past, moments when she had been abandoned, ignored, and belittled, rushed back, igniting a fire she didn't know she still had. She had survived loneliness before, and she would survive this, for the sake of the child in her arms. "I'm not leaving," she said softly but firmly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. The mother-in-law's face twisted in disbelief and rage. How dare she resist? How dare she stand her ground? She had expected fear, submission, and trembling obedience, not this quiet defiance. "You're rushing to the wrong station." The older woman barked, her tone dripping with judgment. She meant more than the literal confusion over the hospital corridors, she meant life itself. She saw the daughter-in-law's choices as a personal affront, a betrayal of family tradition and expectations. But the young mother didn't flinch. Every word only strengthened her resolve. She would protect her child, and she would not be cowed by someone who had never truly understood her heart. Just when the confrontation seemed to reach a tipping point, the door opened unexpectedly. A figure entered, calm and composed, yet commanding enough to silence the room instantly. Everyone froze, sensing the sudden shift in energy. The mother-in-law, usually so dominant, found herself speechless, her fury momentarily replaced by unease. The guest's gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. "You've crossed a line," he said quietly, but the weight of his words reverberated throughout the room. It wasn't just a warning, it was an assertion of truth, a reminder that authority isn't limitless, and cruelty has consequences. The daughter-in-law, startled but relieved, felt a wave of reassurance wash over her. The guest moved closer, placing a protective hand on her shoulder, his presence a shield against the storm that had been raging. The newborn, sensing the change, stirred and let out a soft, contented cry, as if acknowledging the arrival of an ally. For the first time that morning, the young mother felt seen, understood, and supported. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, had no retort. She stood frozen, the words she had rehearsed now useless, unable to pierce the calm authority that filled the room. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. The daughter-in-law realized that she was not alone, that she had allies who would stand by her when the world tried to dictate her fate. The mother-in-law, once confident in her ability to intimidate and control, felt the sting of helplessness. She had underestimated the strength of a mother's love, and she had misjudged the courage of someone who refused to be silenced. The room, once charged with anger and fear, slowly settled into an uneasy calm. The daughter-in-law held her child close, tears of relief streaming down her face. She understood now that protection comes not from submission but from resilience, from the people who choose to stand beside you when chaos threatens to overwhelm. And as the mother-in-law retreated silently, speechless and humbled, the young mother knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for herself and her baby, but for everyone who had witnessed the quiet triumph of courage and love over fear and intimidation. The maternity ward was meant to be a sanctuary of new life, filled with soft murmurs, the gentle cooing of newborns, and the careful footsteps of nurses attending to mothers and babies. But on this day, the calm was abruptly shattered. The mother-in-law, a woman known for her rigid sense of authority and sharp tongue, stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with anger and her hands clenching as if to enforce her dominance physically. Her voice carried across the ward, loud enough to turn heads and stop conversations. "You don't belong here," she shouted. "Take your child and leave." The young mother, still weak from labor, clutched her newborn protectively, her body trembling with exhaustion, fear, and the weight of an impossible choice. She had survived so many hardships in her life, moments where abandonment and betrayal left her hollow, and yet she had never felt this kind of pressure, this sheer force of judgment pressing down upon her. The mother-in-law's words were relentless, like a barrage designed to break spirits. She accused her daughter-in-law of irresponsibility, of sullying the family name, of daring to bring life into the world without permission or approval. Nurses hovered nearby, uncertain how to intervene, while the young mother's heart pounded fiercely in her chest. She whispered softly to her child, "We'll be okay. We always are," and gripped the baby tighter. Every ounce of her resolve was focused on protection, on survival, on the unshakable instinct to shield her child from harm. The mother-in-law, oblivious to the inner strength before her, pressed harder, convinced that fear and submission were inevitable, that the young mother would crumble under scrutiny and humiliation. "You're rushing to the wrong station," the older woman yelled, a cryptic judgment that encompassed more than the literal act of leaving the hospital. It was a condemnation of choices, a projection of disappointment and control, a claim that life was a path she alone could dictate. But the young mother refused to yield. Exhausted as she was, she planted herself firmly, refusing to hand over her child or her dignity. She had learned the bitter taste of abandonment before, and she would not allow history to repeat itself, not now, not in this sacred moment of new beginnings. And then, just as the confrontation reached a fever pitch, the ward door swung open, and a figure appeared who changed everything in an instant. Calm, composed, and commanding without aggression, the guest's presence was magnetic. The room seemed to pause, the tension suspended in the air, as all eyes turned toward him. He looked directly at the mother-in-law, his voice steady yet firm. "You've crossed a line." His words carried authority, truth, and an unspoken warning. The mother-in-law, accustomed to bending everyone to her will, froze. For the first time that morning, she found herself without words, without leverage, her power challenged in a way she had not anticipated. The guest approached the young mother and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a quiet shield of support and protection. The newborn, sensing the shift in energy, nestled closer to the warmth and security that now enveloped the mother and child. Relief washed over her in a tide of emotions she could barely contain: fear, exhaustion, gratitude, and hope all intertwined. The mother-in-law, who had entered the room with thunderous authority, now stood muted, powerless, forced to confront the consequences of overstepping boundaries and underestimating love and resilience. In that charged, transformative moment, the young mother understood a profound truth. Strength comes not from aggression or control but from steadfast courage and the support of those who care. The mother-in-law's retreat, silent and humbled, was the final confirmation that fear could be challenged, and boundaries could be enforced with dignity. Holding her child close, the young mother felt an unshakable sense of triumph and liberation. This was more than a confrontation, it was a revelation. A new chapter had begun, one defined by resilience, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, witnessed by those who understood the power of standing firm against injustice and reclaiming one's right to protect what is most precious.